This is Jean-André Prager from the think tank Policy Exchange, former advisor on welfare to 3 Tory Prime Ministers and author of a report out last week, in fact, entitled For Whose Benefit? Has cerebral palsy himself, so can be both subjective and objective, about a system that you reckon is both broken and perverse. Is that right?
Absolutely. I think the major challenge with our disability benefit system is it has the wrong incentives. And I think this has been discussed quite prominently on this show. It basically asks someone to show what they cannot do rather than being an enabling benefit at all, and tries to and shows what they could do. And I think that's the major challenge. It's the philosophical issue with the benefit system. And I think it's a major problem with our system.
Giles.
Over the last few years, quite recently, the number of claimants from young people has gone up really quite dramatically. I mean, 3 times in the last 4 years for mental health type of issues. Are young people lazier?
No, I don't think that. I think obviously our benefit, and with the young people in particular, I think now 70% of people under 25 are for what you would call probably mental health conditions. And I think it goes to a bigger challenge we've got in a society where our benefit system and the way our society operates has not changed with our society. So our benefit system, obviously, PIP was created just as the coalition government came into force, and employment support allowance was just at the tail end of the Labour Party. And those criteria and the way we think about that benefit system hasn't altered.
So do you blame the benefit system for the amount of people that are on benefits?
I do. I think the system is itself not flexible enough to deal with the current challenges we face.
You see, it seems to me that it's when someone like Dr. Griffiths before is talking about spending £20,000 on his wheelchair, and then someone comes in and gives a sort of technical, slightly philosophical sort of view about benefit system, I want to go, yeah, but the wheelchair's £20,000. I don't really care what the complexity is. He needs the wheelchair, and if you come in and start talking about cuts, this actually creates a real sense of distrust between the state and those who are vulnerable.
I didn't come in to say anything about cuts, so that itself is
so
wrong.
you're not interested in having cuts.
I think the major challenge we have is the eligibility, and when we talk about young people, it's the eligibility criteria has not, as I previously said, not kept up with the changing nature of society. And I think that's our major problem.
So just to be clear about the cuts type of thing.
Yes.
At the moment, there is talk in government about cuts.
Yes.
And that's not something you're approving of.
No, my point is not a straight cut. I mean, there's been a discussion, you will have heard over the last week, about whether PIP should be frozen. For example,
that's the personal independence payment.
Personal independence payment. I do not think that is the right approach to take, because I think the major challenge we have is eligibility criteria and the way people are on the benefit that might not be, and it might not be the right type of intervention they need.
Thank you for the clarification.
The key point.
How do you? So you want the benefit system to reflect an interest in what people can do rather than what they can't do.
Exactly.
How would it actually do that? Give us a sort of practical sense.
I think there's a few things. So I think the previous contributor mentioned this. It's a functional assessment now, so it says, can you do this? Can you wash? Can you cook? Can you walk a certain distance, for example? And that's a very binary thing. If you get a certain amount of points, you get an additional financial support, and if you don't get those points, you don't. Now, in that discussion with a healthcare professional, because they are all healthcare professionals that carry out these assessments, there's no discussion about other bits of need, other bits of support that could be available to you. So, there's other programs that DWP have. Access to Work is a good example, which is supposed to help the disabled person get into work and succeed and thrive in work. There's no discussion about that. and there's no discussion about, social prescribing or other things that might help someone. And so I think basically the system is far too binary and does not allow that.
But it's a system, and systems are binary. I mean, this is part of the problem with the bureaucracy. I mean, one of the things I was really interested in that Tim Montgomery said earlier, he was talking about his mental health challenges, and he said, even I don't understand, what's happened to me. So, my family can care for me and all of that, but we can't expect something as intrinsically ones and zeros as a bureaucracy to really ascertain the subtleties of what people can and cannot do.
No, but we can expect it to be slightly more flexible than it currently is, and I think that is the point I'm making. We can expect it to not be as binary as possibly have more medical evidence in the assessment process, etc., etc. And I think our major challenge is it is so inflexible that we should want it to be better than it is.
Sonia said.
So I think it's quite hard to disagree with you that it would be great if we had a welfare system that was more personalised and flexible. I guess the real issue is that when you look at concrete examples of welfare reform, quite often that stuff ends up being a fig leaf for cuts. And that's what we're seeing this Labour government proposing. Aren't you concerned about that yourself?
I mean, I don't want to retread what we've already said. Obviously, I think everyone would agree that the most vulnerable need to be supported the best they can. I do think we have a challenge around, again, the types of people that are getting the support that we have, and maybe we need and I think we need a recalibration in the system so that it properly focuses on people's on the most vulnerable, and make sure that we have a proper social security safety net for those individuals.
But what about some of the societal structural factors that our last witness talked about? So you want a system that shifts from focusing on what people can't do to what people can do, but that is still a system that focuses on individual capability as opposed to what adjustments might need to be made in society. So I'm thinking about somebody, with profound physical disability who might find it really difficult to get a job interview, let alone a job, because employers just simply do not want to make the costly adjustments to facilitate them being in their workplace.
I think you make a very interesting point in general, and I think there's a problem about how we see disabled people in our society, and I think we need a far more honest conversation about that. I think we have, again, kind of like the benefit system we talk about. We have a binary way we look at disabled people. Mm-hmm. So I would say, even though people talk about 2012 being a great event for disabled people, this concept that disabled people are superhuman versus this concept that disabled people could be totally incapable. And we don't have a middle ground enough in our debate about that. That actually, it's not their whole identity being disabled. Indeed, they want to have a family, they want to go out on a Friday night, they have the same interests as everybody else. And I think part of the challenge is that we don't, obviously when we talk about a disability, we don't actually normalise it quite enough. And the reality of it is that more and more people, 1 in 4 now would count themselves as disabled. But yet when we talk about disability, we talk about it in a way that is not normalising. And I actually think that change that you've just is really important. The fact that, there is definitely still huge amounts of discrimination in employment and other things, and it's actually the way we think about disabled people and talk about them that I think allows that to a degree. And by the way, I don't think that discrimination is right at all, but
no,
it's the reality of the situation we're in.
That might be a bigger issue that welfare reform by itself just can't solve. But one thing I did want to ask you about is, you talk about tightening eligibility criteria for the payments that government makes to help people cope with the costs of disability. Yeah. That implies that you think it's too easy to get. You want to tighten the criteria. Yeah. And I guess for me, it's quite hard to square that with all the evidence there is that actually this money is really hard to get if you've got a disability. That's, testimony from people who get it. It's whistleblowers who've worked for companies like Capita that administer this money saying, actually there's pressure on us all the time to take points off people and not look at people in the round. And it's also the fact that there's this BBC story today, teenagers who get disability living allowance when they turn 16, a third of them aren't qualifying for these disability payments. So it feels like it's very hard to get this money, not easy.
I think, again, there is a broad... It depends on the individual. I mean, every case there's an individual story behind every case, so it's difficult to comment on some individual cases. But I would say, again, on the rebalancing point, I do think we need more medical evidence in our system when we're giving such significant amounts of money. I know broadly that it's only about 70% of personal independence payment cases have any medical evidence, and about 80% for people who claim the top up in universal credit. And when you're giving such large amounts of money, you do need a kind of robust medical element to the assessment process. I appreciate, obviously, that it's a functional assessment, but I do think there's a need to make sure that we have a robust nature to the assessment.
Jean-André Prager, thank you very much indeed. Well, panel, some